Hi, I'm Jeremy Scott and welcome to the Jeremy Scott Spiritual Podcast, the podcast that takes a no-frills approach to all things spiritual. Hey guys, how you doing? Sitting in the park today. It's a little bit windy, so you may get some wind noise, even though the sky is blue. Apparently we've got a bit of a northeasterly, and that's putting a chill to the wonderful sunshine. Okay, we'll see how it goes. It might be okay. I'm doing my best to shelter the mic. Hopefully it won't be too disturbing. So lately I've been reading or listening to, I should say, a book by Dr. Wayne Dyer, and those of you who know Wayne Dyer know what such a great teacher he was. And he passed sadly in 2015. The book that I'm listening to on Audible is I Can See Clearly Now, and basically it's his memoir, and it's full of wonderful tips as well as, you know, his experiences growing up as a child, you know, during his school years, and sort of tracks his career, early career through school, and the things that he had to go through, the things he had to stand up for, and the different aspects of life that he had to face up to, you know, especially his own challenging behaviour, because he was very much someone who stood up for himself, was a bit of a rebel, you know, and was very defensive, as we would say today. And I can resonate with that, because certainly that's how I've been most of my life as well, and most of my time here has been very defensive. If anybody accused me of doing something that I knew I hadn't done, you know, if someone accused me of being a liar, for example, well, I knew I was telling the truth, I flew off the handle. Yeah, I really would, you know, take umbrage, as they say, very much so. But listening to Wayne Dyer and how he handled things and what he learned from him has certainly made me realise a few things that's helped me over the years as well, because in some ways we've had a very similar path. I mean, a difficult upbringing. I'd kind of a difficult upbringing, not like he was, because he was adopted and things like that. Well, he was put in a home, I think, and then adopted, and then finally found his birth mother and so on. But he had difficulties with his stepfather and stuff. And I went through that as well with my stepfather, because I had a stepfather, and not in the same way that Wayne Dyer did, because I think I would say certainly for the first 12 years or so of my life, I was pretty oblivious to what was going on. I didn't feel I was treated any differently, as far as I was aware. That was my dad, you know, and I loved him as my dad, and we did things together. He wasn't a very expressive person. He wasn't one of these ones that had you on his knee and give you shoulder back rides and stuff like that. You know, he was old school in that way, so kind of aloof in some ways, but he was still fun to be with, you know, at times. And I always remember, you know, things that we did. We didn't have a lot of money growing up, and when we moved from England to Belfast, where he was actually born, he was originally from Belfast. Now, we didn't have a lot of money at all. We shared the house with his parents, and a couple of his brothers and sisters were there as well. It was quite a big house, big old Victorian townhouse. But we lived in the attic in one room. There was two rooms up there, but the other one you couldn't use because it was just a horrible place. You go in there and you're full of dog fleas and stuff, all sorts. Yeah. But we lived just in one room, so there was four of us in one room. You know, so difficult times in that way. And because we didn't have a lot of money, we didn't have a lot of sort of trips abroad or anything like that. You know, we didn't go anywhere, in fact. The only trips I had that I remember weren't with the family at all. It was with the local church, an Elam Pentecostal church, where I went to Sunday school. I went to have a yearly trip, and we'd go to the seaside, or we'd go to some small town or village, and there was a field, and we could run around and do all kinds of things, play games and things like that. It'd be like a big picnic kind of thing. And that was like once a year. It's the only holidays we had in those early days. So growing up at that time, it could have been viewed as very difficult, trying times, challenging times, but I didn't view them as that at that time. Like I said, I was pretty oblivious, and Wayne himself says to a lot of things growing up he was oblivious. It's only when he's looking back on them now, as he says in the book, looking back on them, because he was writing his memoir, that he realised what was going on and how events kind of met together and formed experiences which were more valuable to him later on in life. And I can see that as well. So we were similar in that way. When he went into the military, I went to the military. When he went Navy, I went Army. Woo. Conflict there. Woo. But he was a good, I don't know, good 17 years plus older than me. And so at the time he was going into the Navy, there was things going on. His career not long finished, and Vietnam was on the horizon and things like that. But it was during his career that he decided he was going to be a writer, really, and he started writing things, and he'd always been writing, and he was a bit like myself in that way as well. Another similarity there, enjoyed writing. And eventually, he put out his book, Erroneous Zones, or Your Erroneous Zones it's called. That was back in the 70s, mid-70s, when he released that. After his professorship and so on, he'd worked his way through, after the Navy, he'd worked his way through college, got into university and stuff like that. So he made good. And then he started off in a career as a writer and speaker and things like that. And well, we know how that worked out, because there's lots of stuff on the internet about him and lots of books that he's written. And I certainly have enjoyed a few of those over the years. I got into his work, I don't know, I would think just before his passing, so it would have been about 2012, 2013, something like that. And that was, I'd seen something perhaps on YouTube or somewhere else, and I came across his book, The Erroneous Zones, and I got into his teaching, and in later years, obviously more so. And obviously, when he passed in 2015, it was a sad time for us all, because we lost someone who was really, really, sort of very insightful in his views, and his ways of putting things across, and he was a fantastic teacher. But he's left behind a huge legacy, and we can all learn from. And one of the things that I learnt from Wayne Dyer was in relation with my stepfather, because, like I said, I was writing then. I loved learning. I was at school, and it was when I was in the higher level school. It was a boys' comprehensive here in the UK, which is equivalent to like a state-run grammar school. So if you couldn't go to a private school, it is almost the next best thing. Almost. So I know that from when I'd finished the primary school, at age 11, we sat an exam called the 11 plus. Now I know I'd passed that, because I passed all my exams. I know I'd passed that, because the teacher who gave me the news that I hadn't passed said I'd missed out by half a mark. And even in those days, half a mark was nothing. So what he was telling me was, no, you hadn't failed, you had passed, but your stepfather, your father, decided that you weren't going to a grammar school. So I ended up going to the boys' comprehensive, which obviously was a state-run school, so and obviously for my parents it was a lot cheaper. But it didn't bother me at that time. I wasn't bothered. I was going to another school. I was going to learn and stuff like that, And when I look back on it now, I probably had just as good an education there as I would have got at a public school, private school, whatever. It didn't matter. Let's face it, I lived on a council estate, so I came from a very working class background. So I wouldn't have fit in there, although I probably would have, in other ways I would have made myself fit in. But the crunch came, when I started at that school. It was then I realised that my father was my stepfather, and that was because when we first started, in the first few days, I was waiting for my name to be called out, from the roll book, and it wasn't being called out. There was another Jeremy, but it had a different name and nobody was answering to that. But my name wasn't being called out at that time. So at that time my stepfather's name was Smith, S-M-Y-T-H. And I was waiting for my name to be called out, and I had to go up a couple of days later. I went up and spoke to the teacher and found out then that on my birth certificate, because I was shown my birth certificate, that my name was different. So obviously I spoke to my parents about that, and then it was then revealed that my stepfather was my stepfather, my father was my stepfather, if you like. And I clearly remember saying, well, I don't care, you're the only dad I know, and as far as I'm concerned, you're still my dad. And I left it at that. But when I look back on it now, obviously things had changed. His view had changed. I was no longer his son, so to speak, and he started to treat me differently. My brother, or my half-brother, if you like, I always called him my brother. That was his own flesh and blood. And he treated him perhaps a little bit more so in favour, if you like, more favourably than he was treating me. I'd get all the hard chores to do, and I had to do a lot of this, a lot of responsibilities and stuff like that. I was the one who had to mow the grass and dig the weeds up and stuff like that. But when I look back on it now, obviously that taught me a lot of great things. It taught me how to handle responsibility and so on. When I look back at, hindsight's always a great teacher, isn't it? So with hindsight, you're a lot wiser. But the real crunch was at the end of I was just turned 16, and it was the end of that autumn term, so we're finishing up, coming up to Christmas. We're going to be finishing for Christmas, then I'd be in my final term before leaving school. And I found out that I was to leave school at the end of that particular term and start work on December the 31st. Well, just before the 31st, because then it was New Year's, wasn't it? So 1st of January really, by the time I got started. And that did not please me very much at all. In fact, I was furious because we had just done our mock exams as end of school years, just as like a tester to see how we were, just to test us to see how much we can put together. And we had what we call mock O levels. That was like ordinary. The O stood for ordinary level, and it's replaced by GCSEs now. But we did 9. Well, I was doing 9 subjects, and I passed all 9 subjects with A's and B's, so top grades. I was in the top class at the school as well. So I was planning, to finish my O levels and then stay on and do my A levels and then go on to university, and I had visions of becoming a journalist or an actor or something along those lines. So this news that I was to start an apprenticeship as a car mechanic or auto mechanic came as a very bitter blow. I was none too pleased, and I ranted and raved about that. But being the way I was brought up, I accepted it and I started that apprenticeship. And to be honest, for the time I was there, a couple of years later I wasn't there anymore because of an incident that happened at work I won't go into now. But I was still learning, because I was learning about engines and things like that, and I was enjoying that, actually, the practical side of it and the theory side of it. And I did what's known as a City and Guilds in motor vehicle technology, and I got a distinction in that for the first part anyway. I didn't complete that course completely, but the thing is, I started to develop an inferiority complex as a result of that, and because I felt that I was lacking in education, because I was basically a dropout from school. And the guys that I was hanging around with all came from decent homes all around the estate that we lived on. So I didn't really associate with anybody on the estate. All my friends and that, from whether from school or otherwise, came from other neighbourhoods, surrounding neighbourhoods, you know, and they went to obviously better schools and things. Was I being a bit snobbish back then? I might have been, I don't know. But I just didn't fancy hanging around with the guys that were on the estate, because at the time the troubles in Northern Ireland had kicked off, and there's a lot of things going on there. There was a lot of paramilitary stuff, and I didn't want to get involved with any of that. So I wanted to better myself, I suppose, and put myself in a higher station. You know, maybe that's more what I was drawn to. And I started to feel a bit inferior, because these guys were talking about, you know, their A-levels and going to uni and stuff like that, and I wasn't, you know. Although I feel in some ways, you know, when I look back on it now, they were probably looking at me with a bit of envy, because I was getting my hands dirty. I was earning money, you know, I was going to work and earning quite decent money at the time, you know, for that time period in the 70s, coming up to the mid-70s. But it culminated in my stepdad and me having a big bust up, and I got chucked out of home at the age of 17. And for the best part of the next 2 years, I was homeless. You know, first of all in Belfast, where I lived in the Salvation Army hostel for 3 months. So I was fortunate I still had work at that time. So then, shortly after I found a place, a few friends and myself got together, and we ended up going to Portsmouth in the south of England. And then a week or two later, I ended up in London, in the north end of London, and I lived there, for the best part of a year and a bit. Homeless. I was sofa surfing, and then I found a squat, and I lived there for the final 6 months, until we found out that it was about to be demolished, and I decided to go back to Belfast, and then my stepfather allowed me back in the house. But I developed a real chip on my shoulder over that, and developed a hatred for him. And the way he treated my mum at that time as well, when she had cancer and things like that, that didn't add very well to my view of him. And so it was a couple of years later I joined the army and moved away, and I never spoke to him again. Once I'd left home, I never spoke to him again. And I don't know. I haven't heard if he's passed. I presume he has passed because of age-wise now. And my mum passed in 95, so he was a few years younger, so he may still be around, or he may not be, I don't know. I mean, my brother, I don't have a lot of contact with my brother now, because he's got his own life to lead. I think he did mention that the old man had passed a few years ago, but I always regret that I never sat down with him and explained the situation, had a chat with him. However, it was a few years ago, not long after I started studying Wayne Dyer's work, or let's say reading his work, and starting to put things into practice, I learned other methods of going back, using meditation to go back into the past and forgiving those mistakes that you made, and forgiving those people who maybe hurt you or did something to you. And I practiced a few of those, and I went back sort of mentally in time. So through meditation I went back in time to that time period and forgave my stepfather. I told him I loved him, because the thing is, what I'd realised was what my stepfather had actually done was probably the biggest favour he could have ever done in my whole life experience. Because by not going the educational or the intellectual route, by not going to university, yes, I may have ended up as an actor, or I may have ended up as a journalist, or I may have ended up in some other role, an intellectual role or whatever, maybe, But by not doing that, I learned so much about life and people. And that's created a huge well of empathy within me, and it realised that I wanted to help people. I knew that already, that was one of the reasons why I joined the army, for example, was because I wanted to get away from Northern Ireland, to find a solution, to be a part of the solution. Because I thought joining the army would be it, to bring peace to that country. Eventually it did, but it wasn't anything to do with me. But I realised I wanted to help people improve their lives, their life experiences, to enjoy their time here. So obviously at that time when I was going through this, I wasn't into spirituality in the same way that I was doing. I was kind of just tiptoeing around the edges kind of thing. But it brought that realisation that what my stepfather had done was taught me a huge lesson and gave me a leg up in that way. And I owe a huge debt of gratitude to my stepfather for that. And if he is in spirit, I'm pretty sure he's listening in to this as I'm recording this. But I do love him, I love him for everything we did, and we had some fantastic times together, despite the fact that we had not a lot to put around. So money wise, we wore second-hand clothes, hand-me-downs, we had handmade toys and things like that growing up. Great, fantastic memories. And what he had taught me about life by setting me on that course, if you like, because that was a pivotal moment for me. And it wasn't so much that he taught me those things himself, but he set me on the course to learn these things myself, to enter the university of life, as I like to call it, into the world, earth school, whatever, and to really learn and still learning, we always learn, we're always learning, and we always will while we're here. So I owe him a fantastic debt of gratitude. And I wanted to share that this time, because I know the last few episodes have been quite deep, and hopefully this hasn't been that deep, I wanted to share something with a bit more joy in it, a bit more fun in it, a bit lighter tone. And I guess the message here is, in hindsight, you are a lot wiser than you are when you're actually going through something. It's only afterwards that you realise the lessons that you've learned and what you were supposed to learn, And it's also another aspect is the way we think. We can allow our thoughts to really take over our lives and lead us down rabbit holes that we shouldn't even go near. Now, and the rabbit hole that I went down in this instance was developing that hatred, for my stepfather, to think that he had stopped me, he had blocked my career, he had ruined my life kind of situation, when in fact he hadn't. Because by doing what he had done, he set me on a whole new learning path, as I said. But I got qualifications in so many other situations, other things. Throughout my army, I had loads of qualifications that I had that stood me better, more practical qualifications, I suppose. And I still had my writing that I was going through. And I am a journalist, that happened, a freelance journalist. I did a diploma in that, and all kinds of things like that. So I didn't miss out at all in that way. So it was really good to look back on those memories. And I got that, talking about Wayne Dyer, Dr. Wayne Dyer at the start, and that was the inspiration from him that set me on this path, if you like, because he talks about that, how he felt about his father who abandoned him when they were a child and never had a chance to speak with him, and didn't know whether he because his father was an alcoholic, so he didn't know whether his father even realised he had children and stuff like that. And he talks about a time when he went to his father's grave, found out where his grave was, and ranted and raved and cried and sobbed and cursed him and all sorts of things. And then he was going to leave it like that, and he was about to drive away, and he went back to the graveyard and told his father how much he loved him. And that's a real tearjerker when you think about it. And it was very emotional for me. Just recently listened to that story again, which is why I'm doing this podcast episode this time. You know, so it brought back those memories, and I'll be forever grateful, especially for my time here, to my stepfather because of that, for what he's taught me and what the course he set me on, and the upbringing I had, and my mum as well. You know, because between them we had an excellent upbringing, despite all the let's say, I wouldn't say financial hardships. There was difficult times, yes, but there was always food on the table. You know what I mean? And we always had a present at Christmas and birthdays. You know, whether it was handmade or not, whether it was second hand or not, it doesn't matter. I was always grateful for it. You know, and so we had a good upbringing, and it's helped make me who I am today. And like I said earlier, it's opened up that huge well of empathy that I have for others. So in the end, all I want to say is, you know, with hindsight, guys, you can see a lot clearer than when you're actually in the midst of all the fog. But keep an eye, or keep, you know, awareness on your thoughts, your thinking. Catch those thoughts, and you know, don't allow them to take over, which they can do so easily. And Michael Neal puts it nicely. I think it was Michael Neal when he says, you know, when you're having these thoughts, you know, treat them like buses. So when you're at a bus station or a bus depot and you're waiting for a particular bus, you don't jump on any bus, because that's not going to where you want to go. You get on the bus that you want to get on, that's going to take you to where you want to go. You know, and you get off as and when you want to get off, you know. So when you find yourself, say, on a bus, as in a thought, that you realise, no, this is the wrong one, then you get off. Or you don't even get on in the first place. So be aware of your thoughts, guys, you know, how they're leading you down certain rabbit holes that perhaps you don't want to go down. That's it for now, guys. I'm going to enjoy the rest of this wonderful sunny day, and until next time, namaste.